Welcome, everybody. Hello, hello again. My name is Jordan Bain, and this podcast is called Unveiling. My passion is to help people connect with their souls, live their true purpose, and define joy. On this podcast, we have deep conversations about what exists beyond the veils of everyday reality and how to understand the mysteries of life. I'm a certified international kabbalah instructor, senior guide, healer, teacher, and ritual master in the Modern Mystery School. My guest tonight is Joe Elwart. He is the co-founder of the Academy for Empowered Living in Royal Oak, Michigan, dedicated to spreading ancient mystery teachings. He brings with him over 50 years' experience and an indomitable passion for the growth of the psyche and helping others to more deeply connect to the divine. He is a certified guide, teacher, healer, magus hermeticus, life activation and full spirit activation practitioner, among other roles in the Modern Mystery School. He's been married 48 years to his beautiful wife, Christine, has 5 daughters, 15 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. His mission is to awaken clarity, joy, and deeper spiritual empowerment within each individual, and to call forth the leaders of the new paradigm to anchor in light and to serve the great work, and to restore Shambhala, which we'll talk about most likely Shambhala in this podcast, as we do in many podcasts, and what that all means. So, Joe, thank you for being my guest on the podcast tonight and coming on.
Well, thank you for having me. This is going to be fun.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So before we really get into our topic here a little bit, sometimes we do this and sometimes we don't on the podcast, but I don't know a lot about your background, a little just bits and pieces. So I'd love to hear
Right.
personally, and I think most
Okay.
of our viewers and listeners love to hear also, what were you doing before the mystery school and what brought you to this work that we do together?
Oh, boy. I am going to give the abbreviated version because I have had more careers than most people change jobs. I've driven a bus. I've had a real estate license. I've had a nursing home administrator's license. I've been a fundraising consultant. I've been an entrepreneur. I own my own businesses for years. I mean, that's just scratching the surface. But just before getting involved in the mystery school, I was a clinical psychologist for 26 years. And before that was involved in doing fundraising consulting, doing spiritual counseling. And I got a reputation as a counselor, as a psychologist, as being a Christian psychologist, and ended up having dozens of pastors, elders, teachers, their wives, their children coming to me for different spiritual issues. And so it's been a lot of my life has been spent doing spiritual work. When I was in my early 20s, I was doing youth ministry work and was a religious ed director for 3 different churches, an 800 family, 1,500 family, and a 3,500 family church. So that's a start. Is that enough?
It's a lot of things that you've been doing. That's amazing.
Oh, yeah.
So what you were doing clinical psych for 26 years before you started mystery school work. What was that bridge for you that brought you to find the mystery school? Because there's always something really interesting and unique when someone finds a school and decides to get initiated. What was that moment, or what was that time for you?
Well, I didn't find the school found me. And that's a story that I can't even give an abbreviated version of it, but let's just say that Chris went down to Florida. We have a couple daughters that used to live in Florida. They just moved this past year, but for years we would go down and visit them. And so Chris went down one time by herself and was actually meeting up with a friend of ours who had moved down there, who knew Barb Segura and wanted to introduce Chris to Barb. And Chris met her, and she owned, what was the name of that? Shaman's Blessings. And so, and Chris thought, oh, geez, Shaman's Blessings. And they hit it off like long lost sisters that they talked for hours. And after a while, Chris said, so Barb, what do you do? And she said, well, do stuff in a mystery school. And probably, first thing is that we do this DNA activation thing. Now, Chris and I have been very spiritual, a lot of personal conversations with God, with angels, whatnot. And for about 8 months, about 4 or 5 years before meeting Barb, for about 8 months, Chris was woken up at 3:30 in the morning until about 4. And she'd go downstairs and she would sense the presence of Jesus. And so they'd have a conversation. And after about a half hour, it was done. She went back upstairs. And normally, Chris has a very difficult time going back to sleep if she's woken up in the middle of the night. Every single time she hit the bed and she went right to sleep. So she thought, yeah, that's pretty cool. But after a while of doing that, Jesus started showing her taking off the top of her head, okay, like a crown thing or some kind of cap or something. And these DNA strands would come up, and where the ladder part, the rungs that connect, some of those spots weren't lit up. It would be lit up like a Christmas tree, but there'd be spots. And at first he would take his finger and touch it, and it'd light up, put light into it. And then after a few times, he was taking her finger and lighting it up. Well, Chris kept me informed of her experiences, which sound crazy, and I understand it. I'm a psychologist, or former psychologist. But it was a very powerful experience. But Chris was rather distressed by it because she's not scientifically inclined. And she, I don't know what he wants me to do. I don't know biology, and it's like, well, just go with the flow. Well, after a while, she began to realize that the almost, about a half hour was exactly 29 minutes. He'd have her come down, he'd take, not every time did he do that, but take the, top of her head off, like a cap or a crown, and light them up, and she'd be lighting them up. Well, after a while, she said, I can't do this anymore, and just put it aside. Fast forward to meeting Barb. Barb is talking about DNA strands and lighting them up. And Barbara was actually like pointing up, and Chris was wide-eyed and looking at her. And Barbara tells a story that she's thinking, oh my gosh, what did I say? I just triggered Chris. What did I just say? Well, Chris blurted out, I need you to do that thing for me and teach me how to do that for others. Barbara's like, okay. So that's the start of it. Chris came home and said, Joe, I met this gal. She's a shaman, and she works for Shaman's Blessings. And I'm like, good for you. And I'd like to invite her up here. It's like, oh, good for you. No way. And she said, well, can you go to Jesus about that? I said, no problem. And right then and there, I checked in, and he said, have her come up. I'm like, oh, okay. So I told Chris, yeah, she can come up. And she had mentioned this Empower Thyself class. And she said, oh, so you're going to take the class? I said, no. She, I checked in and with Jesus, and he said, have her come up. That's it. That's all I'm doing right now. So we made arrangements. Anyhow, she did come up. I did take the class, got initiated, checking in with Jesus. What do you want me to do? Learn it. Learn it. Oh, okay. And a little backstory of that is being a spiritual counselor, people that had gotten involved in true cults, with the brainwashing and the restricting of movements and the, confiscating finances and all that, like really controlling people. I had been involved in helping some of those people get reoriented into society.
Mm.
And so I'm thinking, oh, no, here's another, it's either another one of those things or it's a fly by night, um, new age, whatever. And I kept going to Jesus and he kept saying, learn it. And I'm like, okay, all right. And I'd learn it. And I was a skeptic, but I wasn't a cynic. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and the difference is that a skeptic eventually will, if the evidence is there, will shift. Well, not necessarily, but could shift their belief or their perspective to
Mm-hmm.
what is being presented. A skeptic, no matter what you present, there's no way
Or a
that
cynic,
they're
you
going to
mean?
agree. Yeah, a cynic, yeah.
Yeah.
So anyhow, I was a skeptic, and I kept challenging it, and it kept working. And so
Mm.
I'd take a class, and I would do everything because I wanted to do it perfectly. I was told I didn't have to believe in it, and it's like, okay, that's great, because right now I don't, and I would do it, and I'd be very surprised it would work. And Barbara would say, "So, what was your experience?" And I'm like, "It worked." She said, "Yeah, I know, but what happened?" And I'm like, "It worked." And she said, "We did that a few times." And I'm like, "But Barbara, it worked." And she goes, "Well, of course it worked."
But what does that mean, Joe?
I know. That's right. And so, um, for about a year, maybe a little bit longer, I kept testing it because, because that's what I do. But also, I knew that if this is a real deal, as far as my psychology practice goes, I'm dead in the water.
Mm.
I'm dead in the water because the moment that word got out that I'm involved in a mystery school, um, there's so much um, built in ignorance and programming, and it's sad um, that word would get out, and it did, that we've gone astray. Let's just put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And
We left the flock of Christ.
yes, well,
That's all of
pray
it.
for Joe and Chris. They're
Right.
lost. They're the lost sheep.
Right.
But don't go to them. So anyhow, it was kind of an adventure. Now, 6 months before uh, Chris met Barb, and I was supposed to go on that trip, but the airlines canceled the flight and never notified us.
Hmm.
And so it ended up that Chris could go because they had to change the schedule. I couldn't because I had new clients coming in and I wouldn't be back in time for that. And that's important to be there when, new clients are showing up. Um, but in that process, it was um, just a whole coming together of things. 6 months, I started to say 6 months before, um, I had gotten a scripture to ponder, and I was told, don't look at it in the negative, look at the positive. And the scripture was where Paul was, and I don't know which book it's in, but Paul was writing and saying, um, those who have not heard of Christ will also be held accountable, for God reveals himself to all people through his creation, through nature.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, oh, interesting. Who are these people that know God outside of the church? And what do they know? I
Mm-hmm.
really I want that. And you know, I held that out and didn't get anything immediate. And oftentimes I'll get something within a few days or maybe a week or two. Well, nothing in a month, nothing in 2 months.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, okay, just let it go. And so when this came, I wasn't even thinking of that scripture, but the mystery school is that scripture.
Mm-hmm.
God reveals himself to all people through his creation. And that's what the mystery school is it has the presence of God in ways that um, it's not it's not burdened by dogma. It's not riddled with prejudices and we're the only way. And this, if you believe in that, you're wrong. It's not riddled with that.
Mhm.
It has some challenging teachings for sure. I'm sure when you start it, it's like what? So that's how we got started. That's how I got started.
That's the short version.
That's the short
Oh
version.
my
Yeah,
goodness.
there's a half a dozen little stories in all of that too. Yeah.
Well, we got lots to talk about tonight, but that's super cool, and I'm really glad that you shared, and thank you for opening that door a little bit. So
Sure.
with there's not necessarily a direct tie-in with everything we were just talking about, but we're talking tonight about mystery school, how you use these tools to create a better life in the specific way of how do you do conflict resolution, how do you resolve things that are seemingly problems between you and somebody else, between two groups of people. I mean, we have this whole thing with Russia and Ukraine right now, but there's so many conflicts in the world. And like how do you stand up for what is true, if it's true? And that's a big question in the mystery school as well. And in the mysteries of life is like, how do we know? How do we know it's true? How do we know what to stand up for? How do we know who's right and who's wrong? Is there even such a thing as who's right and who's wrong?
Right. And if you look at truth in terms of along the lines of knowledge and facts, you'll never get to it. Truth is alive. When you breathe all the air out of your lungs, the truth of what's most important is to breathe in. Right? That's the truth. That's most important, is to breathe in. So you breathe in and you keep, okay, that's the truth. Keep breathing in, keep breathing in. And at some point, it's like you fill your lungs. But when we look at truth as a solid fact, then you have to keep breathing in, because we determined at a point in time that that's truth. Well, obviously, truth in that situation changes. The truth now is breathe out. And that's what life is about. And now I know people get weird. I used to get weird and go, yeah, but people that use that can abuse it. Yeah, fine. Go with the spirit of this.
Yeah. People can abuse anything.
Yeah, exactly.
People do abuse everything.
Right.
So,
yeah,
you're drinking water or tea or something right now, but if you drink too much water or tea, you'll die.
Exactly. And the symptoms of over drinking water is blurred vision, slurred speech, confusion, loss of balance, choking, shortness of breath, heart palpitations, and possibly death. You're right. That, and they documented that from indirect studies. Yeah.
Absolutely. So you can do too much of anything, you can overdo anything, and you can harm yourself. But in terms of when we look at the truth, when we look at conflict, when we look at how do you live a life that's really effective, it's maybe difficult to do a podcast where we really talk about the truth, because in the mysteries, we say there is no one truth. And we're doing a podcast about conflict resolution. How do we resolve these conflicts that we have in our lives? Because everyone has some kind of conflict. Like there's no 100% overlap of everybody agreeing with everyone else on everything all the time.
Right.
We always bump up against someone where we're going to be in conflict, and then how do we resolve that? And we said peaceful fighting, so that's maybe there's multiple things we're talking about with peaceful fighting as well. Right. But let's just talk about the conflict resolution to start out with.
Right. So let me start actually with the piece that you preface that with is, how does a mystery school fit into that? And first of all, the mystery school helps us to tame, even eliminate negative ego. And negative ego is that stuff that's our programming. It's the stuff that we're not aware of, that just, things that blurt out, and we have these reactions. We don't know where it's coming from. And we go from 0 to 100 in a breath. That's negative ego. And the mystery school really helps to eliminate that and change that. So first of all, that in and of itself will help as people simply stay in the mystery school and, deal with the negative ego stuff that comes up. And as you do that, and you're given tools in which to do that. I've used the tools. Chris uses the tools, and we pass those tools on to people. And then we watch people and help people implement them, and they keep coming back and going, "Oh my gosh, Joe, TSW." I'm like, "What? This shit works." And so I'm like, "Oh yeah, that's right." And they're so excited about the changes that are happening in their life. And so it's like, okay, so this conflict resolution, where does conflict come from? Attachments, right? We've got an attachment to a belief. We've got an attachment to a right. I do this and this and this and this, and you haven't done your part. I have a right to you do it. You owe it to me, and we have this attachment. And
in relationships, especially?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Relationships, personal ones, family ones, with society. Society owes me a living. And one of my brothers says, "Yeah, I used to think that society owed me a living, and I realize it's true, except that I got to work darn hard to collect it." So, but when we have this sense of entitlement, and if there's an attachment, that's what entitlement is an attachment. And the entitlements lead us to create the very problems that we think we're trying to resolve.
Say more about that. How do our attachments create the problems we think we're resolving? I get how attachments create problems, but just like ground that for. I can read into it, but I want you to spell it out.
Here's one example. We trust the fear that comes into our life. We feel that fear keeps us safe, and so we listen to fear, and so we have this attachment to listening to fear. And a practical example: there's a young couple. They're engaged. They're moving into an apartment, and it's after Thanksgiving. He's going to go to the mall, and she says, "I'll stay here and unpack some stuff." And he's great. So he's gone for about a half hour, and she hears a knock on the door, and it's her best friend who lived in another state, who flew in for a meeting. The meeting got canceled, and a surprise visit. Oh my gosh. And so they went out to lunch at the mall, and they're sitting out in the hallway at one of the tables, and the friend looks and goes, "Isn't that your fiance?" And the woman turns around and looks, and here he is. I mean, it's across the mall. You could shout and not hear, but clearly him. And here's this gorgeous redhead, and they're like giving raspberries on the neck to each other. He's picking her up, swinging her around, and she's smacking him on the backside. And it's like, whoa, what's going on? Well, the fear that the woman who's engaged has is that she would be cheated on and dumped and look like a fool. So she paid for the meal, went home, threw his clothes out the window into the muddy snow, changed the locks, cut everything off, people tried to reach her. She just, no, I'm not going to be taken. I'm not going to be tricked into anything. So time goes on. 3 years later, a friend says, oh, I just heard that your ex-fiance is getting married. And the woman goes, oh, to that floozy redhead? And her friend says, well, ends up that redhead is his twin sister. Attachment to fear. She listened to fear. And when you do what fear says, when you follow that attachment, you listen to what fear says, it helps to create the very thing you're trying to avoid. She was afraid of the pain of losing someone. And she created the pain of losing someone unnecessarily. So, sure. Yeah. I mean, that's a powerful story, and it's a sad story, but it fits the point. So
and that plays out in our lives in lots of ways, There's and yet there's when we think about our attachments, do people know what their attachments are?
No, usually not, but there's an easy way to figure it out. And that is if you get have a strong emotional reaction to something. That if you have a reaction, if somebody takes a piece of food off your plate, a friend or a family member, you're sitting there talking and you haven't eaten everything, and they reach over and, grab a piece and they eat it. If you go, what are you doing? Or you don't even have to react, but if you're feeling that, then there's an attachment. That's my food, other people are like, I wasn't done. And it's, oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were done. And, but you can look at that.
Other people, meaning people who are not attached, would not have that reaction.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of a dumb thing, but it's a very practical thing. You need gas, and you pull into a gas station, and you do everything. You hop out, and then you notice the little sleeve on the nozzle, and then you look around, and there's sleeves on all the nozzles. The gas station is, out of order. Now, if a person has an attachment that they need to have this thing running and operational, it's their job, because if I need it, and that's an attachment to, I have a right, I'm entitled, you owe it to me to have this thing fixed, to have this thing running. They have an attachment to their entitlements. Or somebody that doesn't goes, let's see, do I have time? No, I'll just get gas tomorrow. And you make other plans. If you don't have attachments.
Conflict is coming from this?
Well, that's on an individual personal level without the interpersonal. When you get two people together, then that can play out in any number of ways. Take a husband and wife where, the wife is, feeling like she's being ignored and brushed aside, and she's standing in front of the door, a couple feet in front of the door, but kind of in her husband's way, who's kind of in a hurry to get to work. She's standing there, and boom, he's trying to walk by her, but bumps her, and she backs up and pushes him. And she says, "Don't you push me." And he's like, "Excuse me, I was going to work. You were in the way. Don't you push me," and pushes back. And she goes, "Don't you push me." Now, who's right and who's wrong?
I just can't get over how miserable that sounds without even thinking about who's right and who's wrong.
I know, but but that's what people get into is I'm right, you're wrong. But from an outsider's perspective, it's like, well, it sounds like they're both right.
I mean, you have a different perspective on this because you were a counselor for 26 years. I mostly deal with people who like wouldn't even imagine acting like that. But it sounds like you've dealt with a lot of people who are
well,
in
it
that
kind
kind
of
of scenario
and it
or
gives
situation.
well, that's kind of caricatured, but but if you look at it, it kind of gives you the sense that oh, okay, most of the time when people get triggered and they react, they're protecting themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And the person who did something that resulted in another person getting triggered, they might not even know what they did. But the person that's triggered, it's like, you're not going to treat me that way. And it's like, excuse me, hey, look, I'm out of here. No, you can't leave now. We're going to talk about this right now. And that might be the other person's trigger is being controlled and demanded and whatever. And it's like, no, I need to leave. And the other person is, we need to resolve it, not let the sun go down on our anger. We need to get it out, resolve it. The other person is, most of the time when people try to resolve it, it's like throwing fuel on a fire. You leave, you let the fire die down, and you go back to it the next day. Most of the time, it's a non-issue. So why even get into it? Now, who's right, who's wrong there? It's like they're both right.
That's also like a communication style thing.
Exactly.
So in terms of resolving those conflicts, though, like how do we work with that in terms of like the mystery school and what we do with mystery school? Because there's, I'm not satisfied with your answers, to be totally honest. I'm like, this is called Unveiling, and I'm like, I don't know if we've gotten to the heart of conflict here yet. And I want to get to the heart of conflict and help like our viewers really understand what drives humans to fight. Like, is it just attachments and entitlement?
Oh no, that's just, I mean,
because I want to go really into this. I want to go really deep with this. Like, why are we as humans fighting, and how do we do that peacefully instead? And then, because I'm only hearing like a narrow bandwidth of like conflict right here, and I want to look at all conflict.
Right, and well, I give the specifics because oftentimes people can, find something or someone that they know and go, oh yeah, I recognize that.
Oh yeah, totally. But, I mean, that's
yeah. Talking generally, what is it that causes conflict? Is fear. Fear that you're going to lose something. Fear that you're going to lose out, and whatever that fear is.
So is it fear of loss for behind conflict?
Well, here's the thing.
Because I'm thinking Russia, Ukraine. I'm thinking like what we had happen with COVID over the last 2 years, where society split down the middle of opinions. I'm talking about all these things, and like, how do we come to like a resolution with this stuff? And I think we need like a real comprehensive analysis of like what is conflict, and then how do mystery school tools fit into that, so that we can help people understand. If we're going to be teaching about effective living, like how do you live effectively in a world where there's all sorts of conflicts going on all the time? How do you come to peace with that? How do you stand up for what is right? How do you fight in a peaceful way for what is right when we live in a world of, where there is no right and wrong?
How many hours did you say we have?
There is a right and wrong. Well, we have 11 minutes left.
Okay. yeah, right. You're funny. I didn't know this was going to turn into a comedy show.
But we can try.
I hear you. But honestly, there is so much in there, because it's not just a fear. whatever the fear is that a person has that they can't handle it, whatever that it is for them, that's their trigger. There's fear, and then there's fear of this, and fear of this, and fear of this, and fear of this. Well, this fear isn't going to trigger me. Neither is that one. Neither is this one. Uh, you get away from there. You know, um, we have there's some fear or fears that particularly trigger people, but not trigger everybody. So when I say it's fear, I'm speaking, as asked earlier just a moment ago, speak generally instead of getting into nitpicky. A lot of it is fear, and fear is the opposite of love. Hate is not the opposite of love. Fear is the opposite of love. Love unites. Fear isolates and separates. Love empowers and enlivens. Fear shuts down and constricts. So, what is it?
So fear is driving conflicts.
Yes.
Okay.
And love resolves it.
Okay. So, in terms of how we live more effectively with fear, love, conflict, fighting, what do you see with, big picture? Because we could talk about like interpersonal conflicts. We can talk about how people, nitpick at each other and how they have attachments and how they're conflicted in their interpersonal relationships. And, but we're looking really at like when we step out of our love and we step into fear, there's always someone to fight with, right?
The biggest battle is the battle within. I'm not going to get into it, but there's a saying in spiritual warfare that the battle is to not engage in the battle, or the battle is within. And in talking about conflict, that's a type of, could call it emotional warfare, interpersonal warfare. And a lot of it comes from misunderstanding. There's this thing called the 5 love languages that different people respond to one or another of these differently than other people. I mean, there's words of affirmation, there's quality time, there's gifts, there's physical touch, and what's the 5th one? Oh, acts of service. And acts of service is Chris's love language. Words of affirmation is mine. But we didn't know anything about this stuff when we got married. And so to show my love, I'm expressing appreciation to Chris. And what Chris is doing is she's doing all kinds of little projects around the house and artsy things and cooking things. And I'm like, okay, well, when are we going to spend time together? Well, she was loving me in her mind, doing all of this stuff, quote unquote, for me. I'm telling her how much I appreciate her. After a while, she's like, if you really did, you'd come and help out. I'm like, okay, that's not a problem. But it's in understanding these things. So now, to speak her love language, I do the dishes. And when I do the dishes, if she's in another room, she comes in, honey, comes up behind me, gives me a big hug. And I'm like, yeah, no problem. And the whole time I'm doing it, I don't feel a lick of love. It's a chore. It's a job. It's mundane. It's, rinse this. And I'm not feeling love. She feels loved, which is great. And I tell myself, she feels love from this. Just do it. Just do it. She feels love. Just do it. And Chris, with the whole words of affirmation, it's like, talk is cheap. Talk is cheap. Come on. Do something. Put it into action. And I'm like, no. Just tell me. Tell me you appreciate me. Okay, I appreciate you. And she's like, I don't get it. And I'm doing the dishes and she's all mushy and I'm like, I don't get it. But I believe it. We see it. So it's a growth process. It's learning. When we didn't have that, we were loving each other in our own love language. And it wasn't coming across as love. See, the chores are just chores. They just, stuff that needs to be done. I don't see doing the chores as showing Chris that I love her. Except now I do, because I know that's how she perceives it. It still doesn't resonate with me. I don't think it ever will. And Chris still has a hard time at times speaking words of affirmation, because to her, that seems like just such a fake, cheap way of pretending and not really showing the love. And I'm like, no, just pretend that. And that feels great to me. So it's learning, being humble, it's being teachable, and it's understanding that here we came to this planet as spiritual beings to learn a number of lessons. And those lessons include being ignorant, not knowing things, making mistakes. How do we handle mistakes? Having limitations, severe limitations, having choice to grow or not grow, or how fast we grow. I mean, there's a lot of things that we've come to this planet to experience. And a lot of them are the things that we get all upset about. That, I didn't know this. I should have known that. And we beat ourselves up. It's like, no. Why would you have known what a didgeridoo is? It's like, can you go get me the didgeridoo? It's like, what's a didgeridoo? You should know what a didgeridoo, I mean, how often does that happen in lives?
I always misplace my didgeridoo.
Yeah. Well, I was just playing with it the other day, but anyhow. So I'm not gonna say what it is. Let people look it up if they're curious.
Those moments where we don't have understanding, we don't know about like what's going on in life around us. Like, what are we learning, and it, how does that either help us or hinder us?
It's operating from our heart. If we're operating from our heart and our head is serving our heart, then we're making progress. And if we're not making progress, that's okay, because the universe, the source, God, the divine power in the universe is incredibly patient and does not have any failures or dropouts. We simply are brought back around that mountain and given that lesson in a different way at a different time. And if we don't get it that time, that's okay. We're brought back around the mountain and we get that lesson another time in a different situation. See, if we got it in the same situation, we'd know, okay, this is what I need to do, without it really being in the heart. But when we finally get it and go, wait a minute, this is like those other times. I'm going to do it different this time. Doesn't feel right, but I'm going to try it. And you do it and it turns out great. And it's like, oh, so that really works. We will eventually learn. And, we're spiritual beings, never been born. We never die. And so after this, rental vehicle is gone, we continue on and our lessons continue. Even in going, can I throw out one of my pieces from my Christian background?
Sure.
Is that okay?
This is
Yeah.
you being interviewed, baby.
That speaking of Christ, it says he grew in knowledge, wisdom, and stature, meaning he grew up physically. But that means there was a time he didn't know something, and then he did. There was a time that he didn't have wisdom, and then he did. And from a Christian perspective, Christ is perfect. He's God, he's perfect, which means not knowing and then knowing, learning, not having wisdom, but then growing in wisdom is perfect. So if there's stuff you don't know that I don't know, and that we're on the path of learning, on this path of progression, as the phrase is used in the mystery school, if we are all on a path of progression, we're learning, we're growing, then we're walking in perfection. See, it's that what is truth? It's like, what is perfection? Truth is not along the lines of facts and knowledge. It's alive. Perfection is not a stagnant thing. It's a direction. And so when we can begin to grab a hold of these things, and the mystery school is great for illuminating truths like this, to use that term again. So much practical life lessons are available through the teachings in the mystery school, as long as we continue to pursue them and seek them out and work on our humility of being teachable. There's no limit to what the mystery school can offer people.
What do you feel, Joe, is the essence of how, when we face conflict, like how do we learn through that, and where does that, like, I hear what you're saying, that like we come around and we learn it again later, right?
Yeah.
Like we don't get it, we come around, we learn it again later, and then we still don't get it, and it comes around again, and it comes around again. But like, what's the turning? What's the transformation? Like, what's the alchemy there? Yes, we have multiple exposures. Yes, there's life lessons. Yes, we can't avoid it. Yes, God holds everyone in that state of, you will progress eventually. Everyone's going to progress eventually. But then
when
what's
the
turning
conflict
point?
comes,
What makes the difference? Like, how, like when someone's in it, whatever the conflict is, and I don't just mean conflict in relationships, but the conflict in themselves, the conflict of their fears, the conflict of, this society disagrees with me. Society wants me to get vaccinated. I don't want to get vaccinated. Society wants me to, believe that this person is better because they have this quality, or society says, you're better if you make more money, or you're better if you have this skin color, or you're better if you don't have an accent, or if you're from this country or you're not from this country. And we feel those conflicts in us because the world is designed with duality to have conflict built into it. But what are those moments? What are what can we do
to
with
get
the
past
tools
that
in those moments? Yeah.
Oh, one thing comes to mind, and that is the saying, do you want to be right, or do you want to be in love? I once heard a Franciscan priest say, he said, when I read the scriptures, I don't read, go forth and be right. He says, what I read is, go forth and be in right relationship. Being in that love. When we care about others, and the best way to care about others is like a breath. We take care of ourselves, we grow, and then we learn to care for others. And then we care for others, and we start to, get depleted. And so we then care for ourselves and we grow. And then we can care for others. And it's a reciprocal thing. Now, in this, pulling back in and taking care here, that covers a whole range of things. What kind of occupation, work, career, job? What do you like to do? What do you love to do? What do you feel is meaningful to society? What are you good at? What can you make money to support yourself and others? Um, when these pieces come together, the Japanese have a word for it. It's called the ikigai.
Mm-hmm.
The ikigai. When all of those pieces, what's meaningful, what you're good at, what the world needs, what'll make you money, when you're what you're doing has all of those elements, that's a point of fulfillment.
Mm-hmm.
And to get there is steps. We have these experiences that we're attempting to grow, and this gets in our way, and we attempt this and that gets in our way. And especially now, the way the world is, so many people are experiencing these stumbling blocks to their growth. And if you think about it, if you persist, and you may have to take a turn in a different direction, because the direction that you're going in um, isn't working, but it's part of your, and go around what you're encountering. But if you think about it, when you ultimately experience some success, a success, what we called stumbling blocks are magically converted into stepping stones. These are the things that I needed to deal with in order to reach my goal.
Mm-hmm.
So, are they stumbling blocks or are they stepping stones? Before the success, they're stumbling blocks. After the success, they're stepping stones. So, our definition of these things, even conflict, is it conflict, or is it bringing up things within me, within us, that is saying, here's an area I need to work on? And it might be a lot of, might take a lot of time to get to that point. But when we can finally look inside and recognize no one else makes me feel anything.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody makes me feel anything. Because if an action makes people feel something, then that means every time that action takes place, people around are going to feel that. And obviously, that doesn't happen. And so there's something else going on that changes that. If if I'm sensitive to being called names, then I'll have a reaction. If I don't have a sensitivity, I can smile about it. I mean, my last name is Elwart, Elwart. As a kid, uh, other kids tried to tease me and say, hey, Wart. Well, I happen to know at an early age that Merlin gave a nickname to King Arthur, and he called him the Wart. And I tell people, hey, if it's good enough for King Arthur, it's good enough for me. So, is there conflict there? If I had an attachment to not being teased, or not, being called names or made fun of, if I had an attachment to that, it would rile me up. And I didn't have that freedom from that all the time. It bothered me. I didn't know what to do with it at first, but then found out, oh, King Arthur called, or Merlin called King Arthur Wart when he was a boy. And, but that's pretty cool. That's my name. So yeah, there's a lot of different pieces that come together, and it's an alchemical process. And alchemy is a process of growth, of personal growth. And there's a whole story about alchemy and alchemists with the turning lead into gold. I don't know how true this is, but as the story goes, the alchemists at the time could see the writing on the wall with the burning of the witches, all the oppression that was happening, and that started putting out there that they're searching for the way to turn lead into gold, which is like, that's crazy. And so the way the story goes, they spread that word, and a few people who got involved in alchemy totally believed that, which kind of both helped their goal and then later hurt it, in that they wanted to be looked at as just a bunch of harmless lunatics and not be dragged out and burned at the stake. But then the negative part of that is that the whole process of alchemy wasn't taken seriously for even to the present day, where alchemy is a process of accelerated growth and change, which is what Kabbalah does for an individual phenomenally well. And which is that, again, these are tools that the mystery school has that I can say, as a former psychologist, 10 months of Kabbalah can easily match and easily even exceed 10 years of therapy. Mm-hmm. And I said that while I was still a practicing therapist. Why? Because it's true. And again, what is truth?
Well, it's your experience, what you kept observing.
Experience. Yeah, right.
You kept seeing that. So.
Right. So it's the mystery school, conflict resolution, how to get along peaceably, is doing the work on me. Mm-hmm. What are my attachments? What do I need to let go of? What are my triggers? A lot of this stuff resides in the subconscious or the unconscious. And again, what does Kabbalah do? It helps to bring that stuff forward so that it's no longer like behind the scenes poking at us. It's up here. And if it starts to poke, we're like, hold on, wait a minute. I don't know that I want that coming into play right here. We have a lot more conscious control when we're aware of what was once hidden. And
for sure.
Yeah. So practically speaking, there's so many tools that are here in the mystery school. And I also have to say that from my observation, there's so many people in the mystery school that don't see what they have. That these tools are so powerful that they do the rituals kind of, half-heartedly. Some people get it and dive into it, and they progress. They have challenges, but they progress like crazy. But as people do it and they start to see the results, they're like, maybe if I did this a little bit more. That's like, the only way to know is to try it, see what happens. and people see the results and they keep going.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, we are way over our time here, but
Oh boy.
there's so much more to be said and addressed, and there's so many other levels to, how we can really, we didn't really even get to like what peaceful fighting means
I know.
tonight.
I know.
So
Yeah, and like I said, how many hours do we have to
yeah,
process this stuff? Because I mean, there's all kinds of different thinking. There's emotional reasoning, jumping to conclusions. You disqualify, you exaggerate, you take a single incident as an example of the way things are. There's so many things out there to cover. There's just not the time.
well, maybe we'll have to talk again.
That'd be fun.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for being on, Joe. It's
Thank you for having me.
maybe too big a topic to tackle all at once, but you stuck with us. Thank you so much. And again, my name is Jordan Bain. Guest tonight is Joe Elwart, talking about conflict, talking about peaceful fighting, talking about effective living using mystery school tools. So
Yes.
if you like this
Okay.
work, if you like my podcasts and everything that we're talking about tonight, just subscribe. You can follow me on Facebook or on Instagram and learn more about podcasts and
He's worth
all the topics
following.
we talk about. Thanks for the
Yes.
plug, Joe.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, love you all. Hope you enjoyed this and hope you have a great rest of your evening if you're watching it live or whenever you see this. Enjoy your day. Take care, everyone.